Hey everybody, in this video I am going to walk you through how to complete the first half of your sticky note analysis activities. Now this is going to be something that we start doing more and more this year, and it's probably going to be something that we do all the way until next year. Alright, when you guys are in 8th grade, this will be something that we continue because it's just an easy way for me as your teacher to track or to see how well you track what's going on in a story, how well you comprehend the story, as well as, to see whether or not you can dig deeper, make inferences and kind of identify some of the important thematic ideas that are going on within the story. So in this video, we're just going to walk through the left-hand side of the sticky note analysis, all right, the purple sticky notes where you track what's literally happening in the story. And we're going to do that with a short story called Boar out there. So I'm going to read this story to you, and then I'm just going to stop. I'm going to ask you some questions, kind of get an idea if whether or not you know what we might put into the purple stickies on the left-hand side. So if you notice over here on the right-hand side, it has the questions that you need to kind of identify in the purple stickies, and I'm sorry that it's a bit cut off. But these will be the same questions that you see in each of your sticky note analysis activities. They'll be there for you. So you need to think about things like who or what, is the protagonist, antagonist, meaning the good guy, the bad guy, the main characters. What's the setting? Where's the story taking place? When does the story take place? You notice any flashbacks or flash forwards. So does the story jump back in time or jump forward in time? Because as a reader, it's important to identify that in order to, comprehend what's going on and make sense of what's happening. And lastly, you just need to be able to identify the important story arc points, meaning where is the climax? Where's the most exciting, important, pivotal moment of the story happening? And then after the climax, what's the resolution? How are things resolved? How are things fixed? So essentially, you need to be able to identify like the conflict, how the character essentially attacks the conflict, addresses it in the climax and that most important point in the story, and then the resolution. How is the conflict and the problem ultimately resolved? So those are the things we're going to point out. We're going to try to identify here in these purple stickies as we read through. So here we go, Boar out there. Everyone in Glen Morgan knew there was a wild boar in the woods over by the Miller farm. The boar was out beyond the splintery rail fence and past the old black Dodge that somehow had ended up in the woods and was missing most of its parts. Jenny would hook her chin over the top rail of the fence, twirl a long green blade of grass in her teeth, and whisper, "Boar out there." And there were times she was sure she heard him. She imagined him running heavily through the trees, ignoring the sharp thorns and briars that raked his back, and sprang away trembling. She thought he might have a golden horn on his terrible head. The boar would run deep into the woods, then rise up on his rear hooves, throw his head towards the stars, and cry a long, clear, sure note into the air. The note would glide through the night and spear the heart of the moon. The boar had no fear of the moon, Jenny knew, as she lay in bed, listening. All right, so I want you to think, who's the main character? Who's the protagonist here? I want you to try to identify where the story was set. What's the setting? How would you describe it? Is there a flash forward or a flashback anywhere? Is there anything about time that might be important in this first passage? And lastly, just what's going on? So you should have identified a few things in your response. First, the setting. And it's a rural setting. If you said it's set in the woods or it's set on a farm or it's set in the country, that's fine. Basically the same thing. The protagonist, the main character, is a girl named Jenny. And if you gave me a little bit more description, maybe she was a young kid, a girl, a child, that's fine too. A little bit of detail never hurt anybody. I asked you to focus on time, and time isn't specific here. Right? She's it doesn't really tell us, if it's set in the past, if it's set in the future. We don't quite know yet. And lastly, what she's doing is she's simply imagining what this boar that lives in the woods must be like, and she's kind of letting her imagination get the best of her, right? So if you were to be doing this, your responses in the purple stickies would look something like that, and I'm sure that's what you all put down in your responses here in Edpuzzle. Let's move on to the next page. A little bit shorter. So the story continues. One hot summer day, she went to find the boar. No one in Glen Morgan had ever gone past the old black Dodge and beyond, as far as she knew, but the boar was there somewhere between those awful trees, and his dark green eyes waited for someone. Jenny felt it was she. So maybe in your answer here, tell me, is there anything important about how time has changed? Is there been a flashback or a flash forward that's happened? And then lastly, just tell me what it is that's going on. So you should have identified that there was a bit of a flashback, right? Time becomes specific here. She's remembering an instance where maybe she went and she actively searched for the boar. And then what's happening? Well, she starts her quest. She wants to find that boar. She wants to go out there and see if she can spot it. She's got to know what it looks like. Let's move on. Moving slowly over the damp brown leaves, Jenny could sense her ears tingle and fan out as she listened for thick breathing from the trees. She stopped to pick a tea-berry leaf to chew, stood a minute, then went on. Deep in the woods, she kept her eyes to the sky. She needed to be reminded that there was a world above and apart from the trees, a world of space and air that didn't linger all about her, didn't press deep into her skin as forest air did. Finally, leaning against a tree to rest, she heard him for the first time. She forgot to breathe, standing there listening to the stamping of hooves, and she choked and coughed. Coughed. All right. So give me one or two responses here. You don't got to fill out all three of your post-its. But what would you say? What's happening in the story here? What's going on? All right, let's see how you did. So if you put something about how the suspense is building as she's searching for the boar, the rising action, the tension is building, that's great. Jenny's obviously thinking about her surroundings. She's taking everything in. She's noticing the difference between the sky and the forest, right? She's kind of, her senses are almost heightened right now because she's so intently looking for this boar. It's kind of getting to the point where, something's about to happen. She can almost sense it. And then lastly, she hears the boar, but she chokes when she comes too close. She coughs. She gets a little bit stressed. And that's not good because that means the boar is going to hear her. Let's continue. And now the pounding was horrible, too loud and confusing for Jenny. Horrible. She stood stiff with wet eyes and knew she could always pray, but for some reason she didn't. He came through the trees so fast that she had no time to scream or run, and he was there before her. His large gray-black body shivered as he waited just beyond the shadow of the tree she held for support. His nostrils glistened in his eyes, but astonishingly he was silent. He shivered and glistened and was absolutely silent. Jenny matched his silence, and her body was rigid, but not her eyes. They traveled along his scarred, bristling back to his thick hind legs, tears spilling and flooding her face. Jenny stared at the boar's ragged ears caked with blood. Her tears dropped to the leaves, and the only sound between them was his slow breathing. Then the boar snorted and jerked, but Jenny did not move. All right, so maybe pay attention, these top bits here, literally tell me what's happening. And then the climax occurs, the point of the most interest, the most excitement, the most important part of the story. And the climax occurs here in lines 14. So maybe describe what happens here in the climax. What is it that Jenny suddenly realizes, right? And then lastly, what happens in line 15? So I would like for you to try to give me 4 responses for this point. Ready, set, go. All right. So in line 11, you could just tell me that Jenny was obviously scared stiff. And then in line 14, you could have told me that the boar appears right in front of her, but it stays silent. They're both just silently sizing each other up. And then the climax, the most important point in the story, when the character finally comes to a realization, or a character finally overcomes an obstacle, or gets what he or she wanted. Jenny wanted to see this boar, right? And Jenny had this idea in her head that this boar was some magical, beautiful creature, right? And she just wanted to see it. But in this climax, she cries because she realizes that her picture of this boar was totally wrong when she notices the scars, and she notices, that it's kind of ragged looking, and it's got blood on its ears, and it's not what she imagined. So her realization here is that sometimes the way we imagine things isn't always going to be the way things turn out. And then the last line, the boar broke the silence, but Jenny stayed still. She's still not moving. Let's finish this up. High in the trees, a blue jay yelled, and suddenly it was over. Jenny stood like a rock as the boar wildly flung his head and in terror bolted past her. past her. And now, since that summer, Jenny still hooks her chin over the old rail fence, and she still whispers, "Boar out there." But when she leans on the fence, looking into the trees, her eyes are full, and she leaves wet patches on the splintery wood. She's sorry for the torn ears of the boar, and sorry that he has no golden horn, but mostly she's sorry that he lives in fear of blue jays and little girls, when everyone in Glenmorgan lives in fear of him. So in line 16, just tell me what happened. And then in line 17 here, tell me what's going on. And then lastly, in your resolution, important point in the story when the climax and all the problems are resolved and we kind of figure out what it is the character learned or how the character changed, tell me, what is it that changed with Jenny? What did she learn? How is she different now than she was at the beginning? Go. All right, so in line 16, you should just have noted literally what happened, which was the sound of the blue jay scared the boar and it ran away. And then in line 17, we have a flash forward to Jenny, in the present, still thinking about the boar. She still thinks about that moment when she saw him, that day when she went looking for him and she finally discovered him. And then the resolution, what is it she learned? How did she change? Well, now she just feels sorry for the boar. No longer does she hold the boar in, some kind of up on a pedestal where she thinks it's this magical creature that, is so wonderful and she can't wait to see it. She feels sorry for the boar. She realizes that sometimes your imagination kind of gets the best of you and things aren't always as they might have seemed. So that would be the way to go about the purple sticky notes. All right, and if your answers weren't spot on, if your answers in the Ed puzzle weren't exactly correct, that's fine. I don't expect you guys to nail this first try, and that's why the first few of these that we're going to do as a group assignment. But I just kind of wanted to walk you through how to go about this whenever you're set out to do it on your own. All right? So if you have any other questions about this video, please let me know.